joy to be invited to be with you today. And so I wanted to start my sermon with just asking you a question. Here's the question. What do you want? What do you want? I think we get that question a lot. You know, everywhere you go into the Giant and go to the deli counter, and the person behind the counter asks you, what do you want? You call a help desk and talk to somebody, and they say, what do you want? You go into a restaurant, the wait person comes up to the table and asks you, what do you want? You see, we live in a consumer society, a society that's based on consumption. We live in a society that is based on wanting. We want things. And, in fact, we call that consumer demand. We have economists who spend their whole life kind of trying to figure out what the consumer demand is moving like. And companies in our society, they try to encourage this. You know, you actually hear or see about 2,000 advertisements every single day between TV, commercials, internet, buses going by, billboards, the ubiquitous little emblems on our clothing that say where you bought the things you have. These companies want you to want their products. Our whole economy is kind of based on it, our society. And some companies are really good at it. They convince you that you need things, you want them. One of the best companies at this is Apple, right? Every year there is a new iPhone. Pretty much everyone has a cell phone, but nevertheless, every year a new one comes out, and then suddenly people are lined up outside the store. And they don't put quite enough in the store, so if you really want to get one, you got to get there early and get in the line. Now, personally, that might not appeal to you. That might not be your thing, the latest technological gadget. But I have to say, this is the thing that makes me want. Here it is right here. Got my iPhone, and it's a 7. And the 8 is out. And they're talking about one beyond that called the X. Okay, maybe your wants are different. Maybe it's the latest fashion. Maybe it's the newest, shiniest car. There's some pretty shiny cars out here in the parking lot. Or maybe it's that kitchen appliance that somehow will make your life so much easier. We are conditioned to want. And the message all day long is that you want something. In fact, they create scarcity. They tell you there's not enough of it, so you want it even more. Call now, operators standing by. It's exactly the reason that we live thinking that it's scarcity, that every time there is a snowflake, you cannot buy a loaf of bread or a half a gallon of milk or toilet paper. Because what would happen if we ran out? What do you want? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. The 23rd Psalm. This is the one. It's the one that seems of all the Psalms to speak to us the most. If you have any Psalm memorized, it's probably the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. This Psalm is such a comfort to us in our lives, particularly at the time of death. I was at 2 different funerals this week, both of them. The 23rd Psalm was present. Particularly because we hear, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. But it is the appointed psalm for today. There's no funeral, but I think it's worth a deeper look for us. The psalm really has a very interesting structure to it. If you read it particularly in Hebrew, which my Hebrew instructor, Dr. Schramm, said that's important to know how to speak Hebrew because that's the language that God speaks to the people. And so when you meet God, it would be helpful if you knew some Hebrew. But anyway, I digress. The psalm has 26 words, small expression, and then 26 more words. So right in the heart of this psalm is one expression. And it is, for you are with me. Or if you prefer the King James, thou art with me. The center of this psalm is the affirmation that God is with us. From our Christian ear, our Christian view, we hear Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus Christ, God present with us. And at the heart of this psalm then is the heart of what our understanding of our faith is, that God is with us. In the person of Jesus Christ, the God made flesh, in the person of the Holy Spirit that dwells within us. And what is it like to be in this experience where God is at the center of our lives? I shall not be in want. When you hear that, do you think that's a promise from God that you will not need or want anything? Or is it a promise from us to God? I will not want. I think the answer is yes. Both. And then the psalm goes on to tell us what God will provide. That God will provide green pastures. God will prepare a table for us. That God will ensure that we are fed. That God will bring us to still waters. That God will give us cups overflowing. That we will not thirst. And that God will lead us in right pathways. That we will have the absence of fear. We will be anointed. That God will care for our very being. God promises us safety. And look too at the language in this psalm. In the first several verses, when the Lord is spoken about, it says, it's in the third person. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord makes me lie down. But when you hit that center, for you are with me, the language changes to second person. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table. You anoint me. It's the realization that the Lord is with the psalmist. And the psalmist now is speaking directly to God, with whom this person is in relationship. God, who is with us in a deeply personal relationship, watches over us and provides for us. God provides for us abundance. Now contrast that with what the society and our culture is telling us, which is there's not enough. We live in scarcity. We live in want. And God says, you shall not want. You live in abundance. God has given to us freely. God has provided for us. And why does God do that? Because we are God's beloved children. And God bestows freely on us gifts of food and drink and safety. Given freely, not earned, not deserved, not a right of some kind, but a free gift of undeserved love from God. That's what we call God's grace. And it's the gift of our Lutheran expression, our emphasis on grace. It's only God's grace, grace alone, that saves us and sustains us. The very thing that moved Luther's heart to begin to call for the Reformation of the Church. When Luther read Paul's words in the book of Romans, and Paul said, therefore we are justified by faith. We have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have obtained access to this grace which we stand. This unmerited love of God. The center of our being is God with us. And we experience that through the faith of Christ and the grace of God. So how is it then that we live our lives when our lives are centered on God with us? the same centering that's in this psalm, the centering of our being, with God as our shepherd, I shall not want. We live in ways that strengthen this relationship, this intimate relationship that we have with God the Creator. And what are those ways that we strengthen this? They're the Christian disciplines that we have practiced for thousands of years. Prayer, Bible study, meditation, silence, worship, service, fasting, generosity. These are Christian disciplines that help strengthen our relationship with God. There was a monk who wanted to have a deeper spiritual relationship with God. He had a spiritual director, and his director had been guiding him through these spiritual disciplines. He had been meditating, praying, reading the Bible, focusing his life on service and generosity to other people. And he was working at that. And so he was in conversation with his spiritual director one day and said to him, "Tell me about opportunities and places in which I'm going to encounter this personal, deep relationship with God." And the spiritual director said, "Those experiences are often accidental. You don't know when they're going to happen." And I know that from my own personal experience. I have had those experiences in this very place. Even at the point where I was trying to discern about going into ministry, accidental conversations with people like Rudy Kreider and Ralph Bigelow changed my life, and God spoke to me. It's an accidental moment that we encounter God's presence. Well, the young man of faith turned to his spiritual director and said, "I don't understand. If it's an accident that I'm going to encounter God, then why am I doing all of these spiritual disciplines?" And his director turned to him and said, "To make you accident prone." A spiritual life is a life with God at the center, that we may encounter the living God. And our response to God's generosity is for us to follow the spiritual discipline of being generous. Martin Luther said it this way: "If God has given you wealth, give thanks to God and see that you make right use of it." The response to abundance is not to say, "I can't give. I really don't have enough. I'm in want." That's the story of scarcity. That's the story that our culture, in which we're immersed, tells us over and over. But we live in abundance, and the knowledge that the Lord is our shepherd, and we shall not want. And our generous response is a spiritual gift that flows out from the gifts that we have received from God. It was Jesus who taught us, "Where our treasures are, there our hearts will be also." Did you hear that? It is not our treasures follow our hearts. It's the opposite. Our hearts go to the place where we place our treasures. If we want God to be at the center of our lives, if we want our hearts to be with God, we need to move our treasures to those places. The spiritual discipline of generosity moves us closer to God. It makes us accident prone. It turns us to God. It centers our life where the psalmist called our life to be centered, with the reality that God is with us, in the same centering that we're about to experience when we come to this table. Because God, in God's abundance, will provide us bread and will provide us wine, And the presence of God will be there for us because we will hear, "This is my body given for you. This is my blood shed for you." And the promise is fulfilled. God is with us. All of us, including Connie and I as members of this church, have an opportunity to make a commitment from our treasures to move our hearts closer to God, giving and living generously. And it is not our dues. It is not us paying our portion of the electric bill here at the church. It's us living into the reality of the 23rd Psalm, that in response to God's abundance for us, God's very presence at the center of our lives, we have a chance. We have a chance to respond, to place our time, our talents, and our treasures where we want our hearts to be, with God. Emmanuel, God with us. A God who, through God's undeserved grace, has walked with us throughout our entire life. Thanks be to God for the grace of God alone that sets us into God's presence. Amen.